I want to tell you about the morning I threw a hungry man out of my bakery. Not because he stole anything, not because he caused trouble, because he asked for bread he couldn't pay for, and I told him this was a business, and I made sure everyone in the shop heard me say it. I have thought about that morning almost every day for 3 years. Not with the sharp shame of the first months, but with a different kind of thought. The kind where you are trying to understand exactly who you were and how you got there. Because understanding it is the only way to make sure you don't become that person again. My name is Rashid Qureshi. I'm 64 years old. I run the Crescent Bakery on Michigan Avenue in Dearborn, Michigan. I want to tell you where this bakery came from. Because the bakery is more than the building, and you need to understand that before you can understand what happened to it.
My grandfather, Hafiz Muhammad Qureshi, had a tandoor bakery in the Anarkali Bazaar in Lahore for 33 years. He opened it in 1939. He was 22 years old, and his father had taught him to work dough the way some fathers teach their sons to read, as something necessary, as the foundation of everything else. The bazaar was one of the oldest markets in the subcontinent, a covered maze of stalls that had been selling things since the Mughal era. My grandfather's tandoor was in the section that sold bread and spices and dried fruit, and he was there every morning before the call to Fajr prayer, and he stayed until the bread was sold.
He raised my father in that bakery. My father, Tariq Qureshi, grew up knowing the weight and feel of dough before he knew how to read. He knew which flour was right for which bread, how the weather in summer changed what you had to do with the yeast, how to read the color of the crust to know when to pull it. This knowledge was passed from hand to hand, literally, from my grandfather's hands to my father's hands. In 1971, my father and mother came to the United States. Lahore was becoming difficult in ways I understand better now than I did as a child, and my father had a cousin in Dearborn who had been working at the Ford River Rouge plant and who wrote to say that there was possibility here for men who were willing to work. My father was 31 years old, and he was a baker. He figured that wherever people were, they would need bread. He was right. He opened the Crescent on Michigan Avenue in 1972, in a space that had previously been a shoe repair shop. The oven he bought second-hand from a bakery in Detroit that was closing. The first morning he opened, he had 12 loaves of bread and a tray of chai biscuits and a handwritten sign in English and Urdu. By noon he had sold everything and had to close the shop and go home. I was born in 1960. I was 12 when the bakery opened. I grew up behind that counter the way my father had grown up behind the one in Lahore. By the time I was 15, I could manage the shop alone when my father needed to be elsewhere. By 20, I knew every supplier. By 30, I was doing the books. When my father died in 2001, I became what I had been training to be for 40 years, the man behind the counter. So when I say this bakery is in my blood, I mean it. 3 generations, 2 countries, 90 years of dough and flour and the smell of bread in the early morning before anyone else is awake. That is what the bakery is, and I almost lost it. Not to debt or disease or competition, but to the specific hardening that happens to a man when he stops paying attention to what he is becoming. Before you keep reading, leave a comment telling me where you are and what time it is. I want to see how far this story goes. I need to tell you who I was, because the man who threw that hungry man out of his shop did not appear overnight. He was built slowly, over decades, from something that started as legitimate pride and hardened into something else entirely. My father was a generous man. I want to say that clearly because it matters later. He gave bread to people who couldn't pay. Not all the time, not carelessly, but he had an instinct for when someone needed it, and he followed that instinct without much calculation. There was an old man who came in on Fridays, a retired auto worker named Frank Sullivan, who had been coming since the 1970s. My father had known him for 20 years. When Frank's wife died and Frank got quiet in the way that men get quiet when their whole life reorganizes around a loss, my father started just handing him a bag on Friday mornings without ringing it up. He did that for 2 years until Frank died. I watched my father do things like that my whole childhood. I thought I understood what they meant. I was wrong about what I understood. When my father died in 2001 and the bakery came to me, I was 42 years old and I had been working in it since I was 9. I knew every supplier, every recipe, every piece of equipment. I knew the rhythm of the day from before dawn to closing. I had grown up inside this business, and I understood it the way you understand something you have been educated by rather than just taught. What I thought I understood was that the business came first, that you had to protect it. That sentiment was fine in small doses, but if you let it govern your decisions, you would end up like the 3 other halal bakeries on this street that had come and gone in 20 years while we stayed. My father had been generous. I told myself I was being practical. That is how the hardening works. Not all at once. It happens in small decisions that each makes sense in isolation, and you don't notice the aggregate until someone holds up a mirror. Let me give you specific examples, because I think the specifics matter. In 2003, 2 years after I took over, there was a family who had been coming to the bakery since my father's time. The Ahmads. Father, mother, 6 kids. They had been buying bread from us since 1985. My father had given the father a standard 20% discount for years. Not out of pity, out of relationship. The kind of discount you give someone you have known for 18 years and who represents a significant weekly purchase. When the father retired, his son continued bringing the family business. I stopped the discount. Not cruelly, not without reason. The son was employed. The family was managing fine. The margin mattered. But I stopped it. The family kept coming for another year, and then they didn't. I told myself they had found somewhere closer. In 2007, I tightened the pricing on day-old bread. My father had kept it at half price, always, which meant that the people who came in at closing time, usually people who didn't have much money, who knew that the end of the day was when they could afford it, got something real for a little. I changed it to 70% of the regular price. Better margin. Reasonable business decision. I noticed that the evening customers thinned out over the next year. I told myself the neighborhood was changing. In 2010, I put up the sign, payment in advance for all orders, no exceptions. It was designed to protect against the occasional customer who placed a large order and then didn't pick it up. Genuinely a real problem, genuinely a business cost. But the sign didn't say large orders. It said all orders, and what it communicated, even though I did not design it to communicate this, was, "We do not trust you." My employee Marcus, who was new then, asked me once if we could donate the day's unsold bread to a food pantry that contacted us. He had looked into it, had gotten the contact information, had done the research. I said no because the insurance implications were unclear, and I was not going to take on liability without understanding it fully. That was a legitimate concern. But I never followed up. I never found out if the insurance issue was actually real or just possible. I just said no and moved on. Each of these decisions had a reason. Taken together, they add up to something that would have made my father look at me with an expression I would not have wanted to see, and that he was fortunately not alive to direct at me. I did not see it because I was not looking at myself. I was looking at the P&L. The numbers were good. I had been at this for 20 years, and I had kept the bakery solvent through a recession and a pandemic and multiple supply chain disruptions, and the general difficulty of running a small food business in a city with a lot of competition. By every measure I had been tracking, I was doing well. I prayed 5 times a day. I fasted every Ramadan. I gave zakah. I was not a man who ignored his financial obligations to the community. By every formal religious measure, I was maintaining what was required of me. But I had made a separation somewhere in those years between the Rashid who prayed and the Rashid who ran the bakery. The prayers were one thing. The business was another thing. I did not examine whether they were consistent with each other because I was not the kind of man who examined himself. I was the kind of man who ran a bakery. My employees knew who I was, not the customers. I was always professional with customers, always respectful to the people spending money. But the people who worked for me knew not to suggest things, not to bring me problems that weren't directly about operations. not to ask about discounts or donations or anything that wasn't on the schedule. I was, in language I did not have then but have now, a man who had let his heart go cold while maintaining the forms of warmth. My father used to say about the oven, "As long as this oven runs, we are in business." He meant it as a practical statement. The oven was the center of the bakery, the thing everything else organized around. But I also think he meant something else. Something about warmth and production and the particular purpose of a bakery in a community that I did not understand until the oven stopped. The oven had been running since 1972, 51 years, with maintenance, with repairs, with parts replaced so many times that it was arguably a different oven in every piece except its history. But continuously, every morning, since my father first lit it on Michigan Avenue in the spring of 1972, and then it stopped. Leave a comment with the word bread. Just that word. The Thursday morning in question was in September. We had been open since 4. By 7, the shop was full. The morning rush, people stopping on their way to work. Good day. Everything running on schedule. He came in just after 7. I noticed him the moment he walked through the door, and I want to be honest with you about what I noticed. I noticed the shoes first. Old sneakers, badly worn, the kind that have been resoled once and are starting to separate again. Then the clothes, clean but thin for September in Michigan. Then the face. A man in his maybe 40s, dark beard, tired eyes, the specific tiredness of someone who has not been sleeping somewhere comfortable. He stood in the line. He waited his turn. When he got to the counter, he said good morning to me in the particular way that people say good morning when they are being careful not to take up too much space. He said, "I have been traveling, and I have not eaten. Is there any bread you are not going to sell? Something from yesterday. Something that would otherwise go in the bin. I would be grateful for anything." He was asking for the bread I throw away. The bread I actually throw away, that has no value to me at that point. That goes in a bag to a dumpster at the end of the day. I looked at him. I looked at the people in line behind him, and I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "This is a bakery, not a soup kitchen. If you want bread, you pay for it like everyone else. If you don't have money, I suggest you try somewhere else." He did not argue. He did not make a scene. He looked at me for a moment with an expression I could not categorize at the time, and I have thought about many times since, not angry, not humiliated, something more patient than either of those. And he said, "God bless you and your family, sir." And he walked out. The woman in line behind where he had been standing, a regular customer named Linda who has been coming to the bakery since my father's time, looked at the door and then looked at me. She didn't say anything. She ordered her bread. She paid. She left. That afternoon at 3 o'clock, the oven stopped. I want to be precise. It did not fail dramatically. It did not make a sound. It was running normally, and then it was not running. The temperature dropped. The bread inside came out underdone. I checked the gas. Plenty of gas. I checked the controls. Everything read normal. I called the service company. The technician came at 5. He spent an hour. He said, "Mr. Qureshi, I cannot find anything wrong with this oven. The gas is fine. The ignition is fine. The thermostat is reading correctly. It starts and runs for about 8 minutes, and then it shuts itself off." I don't have an explanation for that. He came back the next morning with a colleague. Same result. I called a different company. Their technician spent 2 hours and said the same thing. Mechanically, the oven was fine. It just would not stay lit. 3 days without the oven. I want to tell you what 3 days looks like in a bakery that has been running for 51 years. The first morning, the Friday after the Thursday when the man came, I told my employees what had happened, and we tried to work around it. We sold everything that had been made Thursday before the oven stopped. We sold the cold items, the pastries that didn't need heat, the packaged goods, the drinks. I called the service company, and they came at 5 in the afternoon. The shop closed early for the first time in years. My employees looked at me like they were waiting to see how I was going to handle this. I had been managing this bakery for 20 years. I had managed supply disruptions and staff crises and equipment failures of various kinds. They were used to me handling things. I handled things by staying calm and solving the problem and not letting difficulty become panic. I stayed calm. But I did not solve the problem, and I think they could see that I knew it. Saturday, the second company came and found nothing. By now, word was getting around in the way word gets around in a small business community. The bakery, 2 blocks down, Amir's, owned by a man I had been competing with cordially for 12 years, called to ask if we were all right and if we needed any help filling orders. I said thank you and said we were handling it. This was not entirely true, but it was what I said. The staff came in on Saturday and we went through the same routine. Sell what we have, manage without. Saturday is our busiest day. We sold maybe a third of what we would normally sell on a Saturday, and I watched customers come to the door, look at the limited selection, and leave to go somewhere else. I counted the lost revenue in my head. I could not stop counting it. Sunday we were closed as always. I came in alone to do the books and check on the equipment. The oven stood there cold and mechanically normal and completely unresponsive. I stood in front of it for a long time. I had been standing in front of this oven since I was 12 years old. I had watched my father stand in front of it. I had watched my grandfather stand in front of the one in Lahore in photographs. This oven was the oldest continuous thing in my life, and it was cold, and no one could tell me why. I am not a superstitious man. I want to be clear about that. I do not see signs and portents in ordinary events. The oven failing was a mechanical thing that I expected to have a mechanical explanation. But it was the third day, and I was alone and the oven was cold for the first time since 1972, and the man's face kept coming back to me, and I could not make it stop coming back. I sat in my father's chair. 3 days of lost revenue running through my head, the image of customers leaving for Amir's, the technicians who found nothing wrong, the man who said, "God bless you and your family," in the voice of someone who meant it. The third night I was alone. I had sent everyone home at 6. The bakery was closed, the cases were empty, the counters were wiped down. I turned off most of the lights. I sat in the back of the shop in the chair next to the prep table, the chair where my father used to sit and drink his tea after Fajr prayer before the staff arrived. And the oven was cold for the first time in 51 years, and I did not know what to do. I want to tell you what I was thinking because it is important to say it plainly before I tell you what changed. I was thinking about what this was going to cost me, the 3 days of lost sales, the orders I had lost that I might not get back, the money I had paid for 3 service calls that found nothing, the reputation cost of having my oven break down in a neighborhood where word travels. I was sitting in my father's chair at 9 in the evening and I was doing financial analysis in my head. That is the kind of man I was. I could not even sit in a cold bakery without doing math. And then, I do not know exactly when I stopped. I stopped because the man's face came into my head so clearly that I could not think around it anymore. Not as a memory of an event, as a presence, as a question with a face attached to it. Who do you think you are? Not asked angrily. Not as an accusation. Just as a genuine question, the kind you ask when you actually want an answer. Who do you think you are, that you can stand in a shop full of bread and tell a man with bare feet that he cannot have a piece of it? Who do you think you are? I sat with that question for a long time. And then something shifted. I do not know exactly how to describe what happened in that chair in that empty bakery. It was not a vision. It was not a voice. It was more like the sudden awareness of something I had been not thinking about for 3 days. Something I had been keeping just outside the edge of my thoughts because I did not want to look at it directly. The man's face, that patience in his expression when I told him to go somewhere else. God bless you and your family, sir. He had said that to me after I humiliated him in front of a shop full of people. After I pointed out that he did not belong in the same line as the people who could pay, he had said, God bless you and your family. I sat in that chair for a long time. I thought about my father and Frank Sullivan and the Friday bags that never got rung up. I thought about the sign I had put on my door about advance payment. I thought about the bread that was in the bin every day, the bread that I paid to have hauled away, the bread I would not give to a man who had not eaten. I thought about a word in Arabic that I had said 5 times a day my whole life without, apparently, letting it mean anything. Rahman. The merciful. It is one of the names of God. It is in every prayer I say. Every single one. The opening of the Quran that I have recited daily since childhood begins, in the name of God, the Rahman, the Rahim, the merciful, the compassionate. I had been saying those words for 40 years. In 40 years, it had apparently not occurred to me to try to be those things. I started to cry. I do not cry easily. I had not cried since my father's funeral, and I say that not as a point of pride, but as a description of who I was. I am a man who handles things, who keeps moving, who solves problems and does not sit with feelings, because sitting with feelings does not close the books, or fill the orders, or fix the oven. I sat in the back of my bakery at 11 o'clock on a Sunday night, and I cried. Not from self-pity. I want to be clear about that distinction because I think it matters. Self-pity is crying about what happened to you. This was different. This was crying about what you are. The specific and unpleasant clarity of seeing yourself as you actually are, rather than as you have been assuming you are. I had been assuming I was a good man. Practical, successful, religiously observant, responsible. A man who had kept his father's bakery running through 30 years of difficulty. These things were all true, and they were arranged in my mind as evidence that I was fundamentally the right kind of person. The man's face, patient and unbothered after I told him to find somewhere else, told me something different. The oven, cold for 3 days without explanation, confirmed it. I was not the right kind of person. I was an efficient person who had mistaken efficiency for goodness and performance for virtue and maintenance for faith. I said out loud, to the empty bakery and to whoever might be listening beyond what I could see, I am sorry. I don't know who that man was. I don't know if you sent him. But I am sorry for who I was in that moment and for who I had been for a long time before it. I went home. I do not know what happened in the bakery between midnight and 5 in the morning. I was not there. But whatever happened, when Marcus arrived at 5, the oven was running. The next morning I came back at 4 as always. I want to tell you what 4 in the morning looks like in a bakery. The street is dark, and the market is closed, and the city is in the specific quiet that only exists between 2 and 6. I come in through the back. I turn on the lights over the prep area. I start the prep while the oven's warm. For 20 years this hour has been mine alone. No customers, no staff, just the building and the work and the smell of yesterday's bread still in the air. That morning I came in at 4 not knowing what I was going to find. Whether the oven would be cold again. Whether 3 days had become 4. I turned on the lights. I walked to the oven. I put my hand near it. It was warm. Not just warm, running. Running fully, the temperature steady, and even in a way that I stood in front of for a long moment before I could move. My employees arrived at 5. Marcus arrived first, as he usually does. At 5:30, he came and found me standing near the oven and he said, "Mr. Q, you should come see this." I said, "I see it." He said, "It's been running since I got here. Did you fix it last night?" I said, "No." He looked at the oven and then at me. The oven was running. Not just running, running well. The temperature was stable and even in a way that I had not seen in years, actually, the kind of even heat you get from an oven that has just been professionally calibrated. No one had touched it. No technician had come. It had simply resumed, between my leaving at midnight and Marcus arriving at 5, and it was running better than it had been running before it stopped. Marcus looked at the oven and then at me. I looked at the oven. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Then Marcus said very quietly, Mr. Q, I've been working here 6 years. Did you know that oven has never been off before? I said, I know. He said, any idea what fixed it? I said, I think I have an idea. I want to tell you what I did that morning because I think it matters for what I need to say to you at the end of this story. I had bread from the previous day, not much because the production had been limited, but some. Before I opened the shop, I put it in a basket. I put the basket on the front table near the door. I wrote on a piece of cardboard, in my best handwriting, for anyone who is hungry. No charge. Please take what you need. When I opened the door at 6, there were already 3 people waiting. A woman I recognized from the neighborhood who I knew was having a difficult year. A teenager who I had seen walking past the bakery in the morning for months and who never came in. An old man I did not recognize. All 3 of them looked at the sign and then looked at me. The old man said, "Is this real?" I said, "Yes, sir." "Please take what you need." He took a loaf of bread and held it with both hands and said thank you in a voice that I felt in my chest. That basket has been on my table every morning since then. 3 years now. Sometimes I fill it full. Sometimes I only have a few pieces, depending on what did not sell and what I can set aside before I open. But it is always there. Some mornings it is gone by the time I open the door at 6, which means someone came in the dark and took from it, and I did not see who. That is fine. Better that way, honestly. The first few weeks, people did what the old man did. They asked if it was real. The sign said it was, but people who have been told before that something is available, and then been told actually no, that's not for you, those people check. They look at the sign, and then they look at me. I learned to make the sign very clear. No conditions, no requirement to explain yourself. The bread is there, and if you want it, take it. Something else changed that I did not anticipate. Customers started coming back. Not all of them, not immediately. But over the following months, people I had not seen in years came back into the bakery. The Ahmad family, whose discount I had discontinued a decade earlier, came in one Saturday. The son nodded at the basket when he came in and then looked at me, and I looked at him, and neither of us said anything directly about it. He ordered his bread and paid, and when he was leaving he said, "My father always liked your father's bakery." I said, "My father was a better man than I have been." He said, "Well, nobody's all one thing," and he left. Linda, who had been in line behind the man I turned away, started coming in more often. She told me once that her late husband had worked with a man from Pakistan and that she had always thought of that family when she came to the bakery. She said, "I'm glad you're still here." She meant, I think, more than just still open. Marcus, who had asked about the food pantry donation years ago and who I had turned down with a concern about insurance that I never followed up on, came to me about 6 months after the basket started. He said, "Mr. Q, that food pantry that reached out, do you want me to look into it again?" I said yes. This time, find out what it actually takes. We have been donating to them every Friday since then. 12 loaves and whatever pastry is left from the week. The insurance situation turned out to require a single form and a 15-minute conversation with our carrier. I had been carrying the theoretical risk of that insurance question for 6 years, when the actual solution was 15 minutes. I had spent 6 years carrying a risk that was not real. That is the kind of person I had let myself become. Someone who protects himself from theoretical problems while the actual costs accumulate in the people who needed something and didn't receive it. My name is still on the sign outside. But there is a second sign now, a small one, that my daughter made. She has better handwriting than I do. It says, "Everyone welcome. Come in. Take what you need. We have enough." I want to tell you about Mrs. Elaine Cooper, because she is part of this story, and she deserves to be named. She is 78 years old. She has lived across the street from my bakery since 1981. She is a retired school teacher and a Christian, the old-fashioned church-going kind. The kind who volunteers at the food pantry at her church every Saturday, and who brings cookies to the neighbors when someone has a hard week. She came to see me about a week after the morning with the basket, when word had gotten around a little that something had changed at the Crescent. She knocked on the back door, the bakery's back door, where the deliveries come in, which surprised me because it is not the customer entrance. I let her in. She sat down in the chair next to the prep table, and she looked at me for a moment, and then she said, "Rashid, I need to tell you something." I said, "Go ahead." She said, "I was across the street that Thursday morning. I saw what happened with the man at the door, and I want you to know that I went out after him and I gave him what I had in my bag, which was a pack of crackers and an apple. He was very polite. He ate the crackers right there on the sidewalk, and he thanked me, and then he left." She paused. She said, "I have been praying for you every day since then. I want you to know that." I said, "Why would you pray for me? I was the one who did something wrong." She said, "That is exactly why." She said it plainly, not with any particular emphasis, as if it were obvious. When someone does something they're going to regret, they need prayer more than the person they wronged. The person who gets turned away, he goes on, he finds what he needs somewhere else. He had God's favor, and that does not depend on whether your door is open or closed. The one who closes the door is the one who carries it. She paused. She said, "I know you, Rashid, not as a friend, but as a neighbor. I have walked past this bakery for 30 years. I have seen your father, and I have seen you. And I watched you throw that man out, and I watched him walk away without anger, and I thought, Rashid does not know what he just did." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I mean that when someone blesses you after you have been cruel to him, that is not nothing. That is a specific kind of thing." I asked her what she thought it was. She was quiet for a moment. She is not a woman who speaks carelessly. She said, "I think he came to see what you would do. And I think the result surprised neither of you as much as you might think." I looked at her across the prep table. I said, "Mrs. Cooper, I have to ask you something honestly. Why does it matter to you? You are Christian. I am Muslim. We have different traditions, and we believe different things about who God is and what He requires. Why do you care what happens to a Muslim baker on the other side of your street?" She looked at me with the particular patience of someone who has lived long enough to find this question straightforward rather than complicated. She said, "Rashid, the man that I pray to, spent his whole ministry among people who were not, by the standards of his community, the right people. He was constantly in trouble for eating with the wrong people and talking to the wrong people and healing the wrong people. The whole point of most of what he did was that there is no wrong person," she said, "and when I watch a man get turned away from a bakery that is full of bread, I am not thinking about what tradition he belongs to. I am thinking about what I would have wanted someone to do." She picked up her coat. She said, "Do you know what he told me? The man you turned away. He said, 'Don't be angry on my behalf.' He said, 'Something good will come of this.' I went very still." She said, "I thought that was a strange thing to say, but I remembered it." She left. I stood in my bakery for a long time. "Something good will come of this." He had said that to an elderly woman who had given him crackers and an apple on a sidewalk in September. He had no way of knowing what would happen after he walked away. He had no way of knowing about the oven or the 3 days or the chair or anything that had happened since. And yet, something good will come of this. The one who sent that man to your door. Mrs. Cooper had said it as something self-evident, as something she knew the way she knew other things she knew well. I turned the phrase over in my mind for a long time. I had been running from that thought for days. Not because it was impossible. I am a man who believes in God. I have believed my whole life that God acts in the world. But because if I allowed the thought that the man at my door had been sent, then I had to allow what came with it. That I had been tested, and I had failed, and that the one doing the testing had known exactly what I would do before I did it, and had sent the test anyway, not to punish me, but to show me something I needed to see. That is not a comfortable thought. but it is the only thought that makes sense of what happened. Leave a comment with the word open, because the bakery is open now in a way it wasn't before. And I want to know if you understand what I mean by that. I have been reading since then. Not just the Quran. I have read it my whole life since my father taught me. I mean reading about the man Mrs. Cooper prays to. About what he said, and what he did, and what he claimed to be. I want to be honest about why I started. I did not start because I was looking for a reason to change what I believed. I am a Pakistani-American Muslim man who has practiced his faith since childhood. My religion is not something I wear loosely. I started reading because something had happened that I could not explain. And when I cannot explain something, I try to find the explanation. A man had come to my door. He had left with nothing. He had told an old woman on a sidewalk that something good would come of this. The oven had stopped. 3 technicians had found nothing wrong. The oven had started again after I cried in the chair where my father used to sit. I needed to understand what kind of thing that was. I had been taught, as most Muslims are taught, that Jesus, Isa in Arabic, was a prophet. An important prophet, a miraculously born prophet, a righteous man who performed miracles and who will return at the end of days. The Quran speaks highly of him. He is not dismissed or minimized. He is, in Islamic teaching, one of the great prophets, the one who came before the final messenger. I had accepted this since childhood without much examination. That is how most of us accept the framework of our faith. As children, from people we trust, and then we carry it forward into adulthood without re-examining every piece. When I actually read the Gospels for the first time, as a 62-year-old man sitting at the prep table in my bakery after closing, I found something I had not expected. The Jesus in the Gospels is not doing what prophets do. Prophets speak in the name of God. They say, "Thus says the Lord." They point away from themselves toward the one who sent them. They are very clear that they are messengers, not the message. The Jesus in the Gospel says, "I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life." He says, "Before Abraham was, I am," using the divine name, the exact name God speaks to Moses from the burning bush, and saying it about himself in a context where everyone around him would have understood immediately what he was doing. The text records that they picked up stones, which is what you did in that tradition, when someone had said something that could not be forgiven. He says, "Whoever has seen me has seen the Father." He forgives sins, which in the theology of the time was something only God could do. The people around him knew this and they said so. I read this and I thought, either this man believed something completely extraordinary about himself, or the people who wrote this down were putting words in his mouth that he never said. Those are the options. There is no third option where he is simply a wise teacher who was misunderstood. A wise teacher does not claim to be the divine name. I spent a lot of time on the resurrection. I had been taught that it had not happened the way Christians described, that the story had been altered, added to, that what began as the account of a good man had been inflated into something miraculous. But when I looked at the historical record as closely as I could, the accounts of what people said they saw, the timeline of when those accounts were circulating, the lives of the people who made those claims, I found something that did not fit the inflation theory. The people who said they had seen Jesus alive after his death were not people passing on a rumor. They were people saying, "I was there, I saw him, I talked to him." And then they spent the rest of their lives saying so under conditions where saying so was not safe. People die for things they believe. People do not die for things they know to be fabricated. If the resurrection was a story that developed over decades, if the first followers knew it had not happened and invented it anyway, then you have to explain why so many of them chose very hard deaths, rather than simply say, "Actually, let me clarify what we meant by that." I am not saying I have resolved every theological question. I am 64 years old, and there are questions I am still working through, and probably will be until I die. But here is what I came to, sitting at the prep table in the bakery in the months after the oven started again. Something extraordinary happened in first-century Palestine. Whatever it was, the people who were closest to it were so changed by it that they remade their entire understanding of who God is and what God wants. And what they said God is and what they said God wants was the particular thing that Mrs. Cooper had said to me across the prep table, that there is no wrong person, that the door is always open, that the one who comes to your door in bare feet in September is not a test of your charity. He is someone who wants to see if your heart has room. My heart did not have room. He came anyway. He came back, through the oven, and the old woman and the basket, and the years of small changes that are still happening. That is not what a prophet does. That is what love does. I have prayed differently since then. Not the words. The words of the Fajr are the same words my grandfather said in Lahore. But what happens inside the words is different. I am not maintaining a practice. I am talking to someone. And some mornings, in the quiet of the bakery before the ovens warm up and before Marcus and the others arrive, I talk to the one that Mrs. Cooper prays to. Not with certainty about every theological question, with honesty about what I know and what I have seen. I want to tell you what my granddaughter said. She is 8 years old. Her name is Layla. She is the eldest of my son's children, my first grandchild, named after my mother. She comes to the bakery sometimes on Saturday mornings, the way I came as a child, the way my children came after that. She is a serious child who asks real questions and then waits for real answers, which is unusual at 8 and which I suspect she gets from her grandmother's side of the family. Last spring, she was sitting on the wooden stool near the front, the same stool I sat on at her age, waiting for my father to have a moment, and she watched me put bread in the basket and she said, "Dada, why do you do that every day?" I said, "Because some people need it." She said, "But you don't know who they are." I said, "No." She said, "Does that matter?" I thought about that. She was right that it was the interesting question. Not why, but whether knowing matters. I said, "No. It turns out not." She considered this. She picked up a small piece of bread from the basket, a piece of flatbread that had been there since I filled it at opening, and she looked at it. She said, "Do they come in and take it?" I said, "Sometimes. Sometimes it's gone when I come in Monday morning and I don't know who took it. That's fine." She said, "Does it make you feel good to do it?" I said, "It makes me feel right." Which is different from good. Good is a feeling. Right is more like being in the correct position, like a door that is properly hung. It opens and closes the way it should. She nodded very seriously. She is 8 years old, and she nodded like she understood the difference between good and right, which I did not understand at 62 until 3 years ago. She put the piece of bread back in the basket. She said, "I think we should put more in tomorrow." I said, "I think you're right. She is 8 years old. She already understands more about what the bakery is for than I did at 62. I want to tell you about Marcus before I tell you about the last thing. Marcus Delaney has worked for me since he was 22. He is now 28. He grew up in Dearborn. His mother is from the neighborhood. His father worked at the Chrysler plant before it closed. He is a good baker, patient with the dough, attentive to the oven, the kind of employee who shows up early and stays late without being asked, and who I had been, for 6 years, treating as a function rather than a person. After the basket started, and after the food pantry donation started, and after the Ahmads came back, and after the other small things that had been changing, Marcus came to me one Tuesday afternoon when we were both cleaning up after close. He said, "Mr. Q, can I ask you something?" I said, "Go ahead." He said, "What happened after the oven broke down?" I said, "Something changed." He said, "I can tell." He paused. He said, "You're different." I said, "Is it better or worse?" He thought about it. He said, better. But it's also, he paused again. He said, it's like you finally showed up. I looked at him. He said, I don't mean that as a criticism. I just mean that before, you were always here, but you were somewhere else too. Like part of you was always calculating. And now you're more here. I said, you noticed that? He said, Mr. Q, we all noticed. I did not say anything for a moment. Then I said, Marcus, do you remember when you asked about the food pantry donation years ago? He said, yeah. I said, I'm sorry I didn't follow through on that. That was on me. He said, it worked out. I said, it should have worked out 6 years ago. He nodded. He said, yeah. But it's working out now. That's the part that matters. I thought about that. That is the part that matters. Marcus was 28 years old, and he had a cleaner understanding of grace than I had managed at 62. I want to close with something that happened about 6 months after all of this. I was working late, just me and the oven and the smell of the next day's bread proving in the proofing box. About 9 in the evening, a man knocked on the back door. I was not expecting anyone. I went to the door. It was an older man, maybe 70, in a good coat. He said he had seen the basket out front and had a question. I let him in. He said, I drove past your bakery for 10 years and I never came in. Then I heard from a friend that you put bread out for people who need it. I came in one morning about 4 months ago and I took some bread from the basket. I want to pay for it now. He held out $20. I said, Sir, the bread in that basket is given. You don't owe anything for it. He said, I know. That's why I want to pay for it, because you didn't ask for anything. He left the $20 on the prep table, and he left. I looked at that $20 for a while. Then I thought about what my father used to say when something worked out better than it should have. He would say, God's math is different from ours. My father was right about most things. He was right about that. To every person watching this who runs a business, who has customers and employees and margins and all the real and legitimate pressure of keeping something alive, I am not telling you that the way to succeed is to give away your product. That is not the point. The point is something I understand now that I did not understand for 40 years of running a bakery. It is possible to be so focused on the business that you stop seeing the people inside it. And when you stop seeing people, you have already lost something more important than margin, even if the numbers still look fine. You have lost the reason the business should exist. You have become the oven without the warmth. My father never lost that. He gave bread to Frank Sullivan for 2 years without talking about it, without making it a policy, without building a sign for it. He just knew Frank needed it, and he did it. I used to watch him and think that was sentiment. I was wrong. That was the whole point. The business existed so that he could do things like that. The margin served the generosity. He had the order right. I had the order backwards for 20 years. To anyone watching this who, like me, has been practicing their faith as a form, saying the words and doing the rituals and maintaining the appearance of the thing while letting the interior of the thing go cold, I want to tell you something I had to learn the hard way. The forms exist to hold something. They are the vessel, not the content. The content is what happens when a man with bare feet asks you for bread, and you either see a person or you see a demand. I saw a demand. He came back anyway. Through an oven that would not run, and an old woman across the street and a basket of bread on a table, and the slow accumulation of small changes that have been happening for 3 years, and that I think will be happening for the rest of my life. To any Muslim watching this who is where I was, I am not asking you to abandon anything you believe. I am telling you what I found when I read about the man Mrs. Cooper prays to with fresh eyes. I found someone who came for the people no one else came for, who ate with the wrong people and healed the wrong people and told the wrong people that they were seen and loved and welcome. I found someone who came to a bakery in Dearborn through a man with bare feet and an old woman across the street and the specific cold of an oven that would not run. And I found that when he comes for you, He does not come with conditions or requirements or a checklist of the right answers. He comes the way he came to my bakery, at the moment when you have run out of other explanations. I lost sight of people for a long time. A man with bare feet in September showed me what I had become. He asked for bread I throw away. I said no, and I spent 3 days in a cold bakery with the question of who I was. I know who sent him. I know what he was offering. I received it later than I should have. But the offer did not expire while I was figuring it out. It does not expire. God's math is different from ours. My father was right about that and right about most things. The bread I give away has come back many times over. The customers I lost came back and brought others. The oven runs. The basket is there every morning. That is not a formula. Do not take it as a formula. Take it as evidence of a character, of a way of being in the world that has been there since before any of us, that gives without calculation and returns what is given with interest we could not have predicted. He came to my door in bare feet. He said, "God bless you and your family, sir." He meant it. Write the word bread in the comments. The iota. Let me see where this reaches today. May Jesus walk with you today and in every day that is still ahead of you. Amen.